Peter and Nadia had been desperately searching for a way to help their son Josh, who had been sick for much of his life. After exhausting all of their options, the family prepared to say their final farewell and spend Josh's last moments with his beloved dog Snickers. Yet, when they went to say goodbye, a glimmer of hope appeared in Josh's eyes that his parents noticed. Seeing this, they decided to take a chance, hoping it would make a difference. This fateful decision would completely transform Josh and his family's lives. The hug between Josh and his dog Snickers seemed to last a lifetime, and his parents were hesitant to interrupt it. They knew that this could very well be the last time they would see each other, and they wanted to give Josh as much time as possible to say goodbye. But during this seemingly endless hug, something seemed to change in the very sick Josh. His parents couldn't explain it, but it was noticeable enough to inform the doctor about it. The doctor had never seen a hug have such a profound effect on a patient. He was amazed and couldn't help but wonder if the power of love was really strong enough to make a difference in Josh's condition. So he began to research the effects of love on the human body. He was amazed by what he found. He was determined to use this newfound knowledge to help Josh. He decided to do whatever he could to make sure that Josh got the help he needed. By some miracle, the hug between Josh and Snickers had finally given the doctor the answers he had been looking for so long. But what had the parents noticed about Josh during the hug? What was actually wrong with him? And would he now be able to get better? What was the underlying issue that had been causing him so much pain? The doctor had to find out what was wrong with Josh in order to help him. He had to figure out what had been causing the boy so much distress. The doctor had to look into Josh's medical history to see if there were any clues as to what was wrong with him. He had to look at his family history to see if there were any genetic issues that could be causing the problem. Most importantly, he also had to check his lifestyle to see if there were any environmental factors that could be causing the issue. Poor little Josh had been in and out of hospitals for the majority of his young life. He could go from perfectly healthy to really sick in no time, and no doctor had not yet been able to determine what was actually wrong with him. Josh's condition had been the focus of the family for years now, and dealing with it consumed most of their lives. The only company they really kept was those of hospital staff and their loyal dog Snickers. The family had been through so much, and it seemed like the only thing that could bring them joy was the thought of Josh getting better. They had tried every treatment and medication available, but nothing seemed to work. The family was desperate for a solution, but it seemed like they were running out of options. They had even considered moving to a different city in search of a better hospital, but they were hesitant to leave their home. Despite the hardships, the family was determined to find a way to help Josh and get him back to a healthy state. Josh's parents, Peter and Nadia, had adopted Snickers way before Josh was even born. They loved the animal with all their hearts. They had taken him in as a pup and had watched him grow into a loyal companion. Although it did seem like Snickers loved Josh even more than them, every time Josh had to go to the hospital again for days or even weeks on end, Snickers would just sulk in his bed and have very little energy to play. You could see in these moments that he was, in fact, already an old dog, one whose life might be just as at risk as Josh, but he was still a source of comfort and joy for the family. They were all grateful for his presence in their lives. Snickers was a reminder of the importance of family and the power of unconditional love. He was a symbol of hope and resilience, that no matter how hard life gets, there is always something to be thankful for. It was Peter and Nadia's worst nightmare to lose their dog, but if they were to lose their son as well at this time, that might just be the nail in the coffin for the couple. They had been through so much together, it was hard to imagine life without Snickers. But they knew that there was still a lot of life in the old dog, as that was always on display when Josh came home again. The bond between the two was undeniable, and it was a sight to behold. The couple had tried their best to keep the dog healthy and happy, but as he got older, it became more and more difficult. They had to make sure he was getting enough exercise and eating the right food. But despite all of their efforts, the dog was getting older and his health was declining. They knew that eventually they would have to say goodbye. However, they were hoping that it wouldn't be too soon. Snickers would completely light up, wagging his tail and jumping around for joy. His tail would wag so hard that it seemed like it was going to fly off. His eyes would light up with joy, and he would bark and bark with excitement. The dog could simply not contain his excitement when his best friend in the whole wide world came home. He would jump up and down, trying to get as close to Josh as possible. Josh would kneel down and give Snickers a big hug, rubbing his head and scratching his ears. They would spend as much time as possible together cause they knew it would probably not be long before Josh was in the hospital again. Snickers would be so happy, running around and exploring the world with his best friend. Sadly, Josh's time in the hospital only grew longer as he got older. His body had grown weary from the years of battling this unknown illness. Every time he got sick, it would take a long time for him to regain his strength and be able to go home. The family also sought out the help of many specialists all over the country, which meant that Josh had to be away from home for weeks at a time. The family was desperate for a solution. They have tried every possible remedy they could find, but nothing seemed to work, and Josh's condition only worsened. The family was heartbroken, and they felt helpless as they watched their son suffer. The family was determined to find a cure and refused to give up hope. They continued to search for a doctor who could help them. Sometimes they were able to take Snickers with them, but most of the time, the old dog stayed with family while they were away. Josh was always sad to leave him behind, knowing that it meant even more time that he and Snickers were apart. He couldn't help but wonder how much more time they potentially still had together. He knew that Snickers was getting older and wanted to make the most of the time they had left. He would often take extra time to play with him and give him extra treats when he was home. Josh was always so happy to see Snickers when he returned, and Snickers was always so excited to see him. Josh knew that Snickers was the best dog in the world, and he was so grateful to have him in his life. The cost of Josh's illness was a huge burden on the family. Not only did they have to pay for the medical treatments, but they also had to pay for the medications, the hospital visits, and the travel expenses. All of these costs added up quickly, and the family was struggling to keep up with the payments. They wanted to try everything to cure their son. They had to take out loans and use their savings to pay for the treatments, and they were quickly running out of money. The family was also struggling to keep up with the cost of living. With the added expenses of Josh's illness, they had to cut back on other things. They had to make tough decisions about what was important and what wasn't. They had to make sure that Josh's treatments were taken care of first, and that the other expenses were secondary. They started dealing with the emotional toll of Josh's illness. Peter was doing his very best to make as much money from anywhere that he could, but it was nowhere near enough to make the down payments on all the loans they had taken out. The banks were ruthless when it came to their money, and it was a very real worry that the family would soon lose their house. It was a difficult situation for the family, and it came to a point where a very difficult decision had to be made. The family had to decide whether to use the money they had saved up for Josh's medical bills to pay off the loans, or to keep the money for Josh's medical bills and risk losing their house, car, and everything else. It was a heartbreaking decision for the family, and they were desperate for a solution. They had already taken out so many loans, and the banks were not willing to give them any more. And besides that, all the experts that the family had asked for help had come up with the same conclusion. The family had tried everything they could think of to help Josh. They had consulted with doctors, therapists, and other experts in the field, but none of them could provide a solution. So why did they have to make the rest of his life about suffering in hospitals away from his best friend, Snickers? Would it not be more humane to just have him enjoy the time he got left and then see when his time would come? That is what the family would end up deciding. On the same note, they also wanted to make sure that Snickers was comfortable and happy in his last days. They wanted to make sure that he was surrounded by love and joy in his last days. The family also made sure to take lots of pictures of Snickers and Josh so that they could remember them forever. They also made sure to keep a journal of all the memories they had with him. They wanted to make sure that they could look back on all the happy times they had with him. The days started off quite well for the family, with Josh feeling well and Snickers being overjoyed to be reunited with his friend. They would spend the entire day playing. Peter and Nadia would watch with smiles and tears in their eyes. It was a beautiful sight to behold, and it filled their hearts with joy. They would often reminisce about the days when Josh was a baby and Snickers was just a pup. They would recall the days when they would take them out for walks in the park or to the beach. The days were filled with laughter and love, and it was a time that the family would never forget. They would often talk about the future and what it would be like when Josh and Snickers were all grown up. They would imagine the adventures they would have together and the memories they would make. They had not told Josh about their plan. He was too young to understand and might spend his days worrying instead of enjoying himself. That is what is most important right now, that he spends his days with a smile on his face every waking moment. Peter and Nadia had hoped that the time outside of the hospital would give Josh a chance to get stronger, but sadly it only took a couple of days before the symptoms started to appear again. Their son was very used to these symptoms by now, and it did nothing to dampen his fun. He still wanted to play all day, every day, and Snickers was more than happy to oblige. At first, the energy was a welcomed change for the beloved family dog. He was able to keep up with Josh's energy, and the two of them had a great time playing together. But after about a week, Snickers started to slow down significantly even though Josh still had energy. This caused Peter and Nadia to worry a little bit more about their beloved pet. They had grown so attached to Snickers, and the thought of something happening to him was unbearable. They ensured that he was achieving the proper exercise and medical attention the dog required. All of these things were necessary to ensure that Snickers was healthy and happy. Peter was starting to worry about their beloved pup, Snickers. His tail was no longer wagging as enthusiastically as it used to, and he was starting to slow down. Peter had never seen him like this before, and he was concerned. His energy started to drop so significantly that Peter thought it would probably be best to get him to a vet for a quick check. Peter had called ahead to the vet and explained the symptoms of Snickers to him. He was hoping the expert could give him an idea of what was wrong with the dog, and the vet told him exactly what he feared. But he was also hopeful that the vet would be able to help his beloved pet. The vet examined Snickers and prescribed a course of antibiotics and other medications to help the dog. He also gave Peter instructions on how to care for Snickers at home and what to do if the dog's symptoms worsened. Peter was relieved to hear that Snickers would be okay and thanked the vet for his help. He told him to keep an eye on Snickers and to call him if the dog's condition changed, and the vet told him exactly what he feared. He could not determine what was exactly wrong with Snickers over the phone, but compared to dogs that came in with similar symptoms, the vet could give him the indication that Snickers might be away from home for 2 to 3 weeks. Those words were heartbreaking for Peter. He knew that if he decided to bring Snickers away to the vet, which was looking like it was very much necessary for the dog's survival, there was a very good chance that Josh would never see his friend again. Peter felt devastated for Josh. He had grown up with Snickers, and the thought of not having him around was unbearable. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast. He was torn between the two options, and he had no idea what to do. He thought about all the memories he had with Snickers. Peter was deeply concerned about his son Josh, as his condition had deteriorated rapidly. He knew that he would have to take him to the hospital again soon, in order to make him as comfortable as possible. They had both agreed that they would not attempt to treat his symptoms any further when he was admitted. He had tried to make the most of the time they had together, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. He was determined to make sure that Josh was as comfortable as possible, and that he was surrounded by love and support. He was also determined to make sure that Josh was not in any pain. He had already discussed the situation with the doctors, and they had agreed that the best course of action was to make Josh as comfortable as possible. Peter was determined to make sure that his son was surrounded by love and support. Peter agreed with the vet that he would bring Snickers in the next day and that he should keep him there as long as it took to get him healthy again. The thought of doing this broke Peter's heart, but he could not lose both his son and his best friend like that. He had been with Josh since he was a pup, and he had been there for him through thick and thin. He had been a loyal companion and a true friend, and Peter knew that he had to do whatever it took to get him healthy again. He knew that it was going to be a long road, but he was ready to take it one step at a time. Peter was filled with a mix of emotions as he drove to Josh's house. He was sad that he had to tell his son the news, but he was also excited to give them one more day together. He was determined to make it the best day ever. When he arrived, he found Josh playing with Snickers in the backyard. He watched them for a few moments, taking in the sight of his son and his beloved pet. Peter took a deep breath and walked over to Josh. He knelt down and put his arm around his son's shoulder. He told Josh that he had something important to tell him. Josh looked up at him with a worried expression, and Peter could feel his heart breaking. Josh was resting in bed at the time, feeling a little worse for wear. His symptoms had been getting worse by the day. He knew he needed a lot of rest to get through the day. He had been dreading this day for a while, as he had been told it was his last day with Snickers, his beloved pet. He was feeling a mix of emotions, sadness at the thought of losing his furry friend, but also a sense of joy that Snickers would be going to feel somehow better. He had been trying to make the most of their time together, taking him for long walks and playing fetch in the park. He had even taken him to the beach a few times, and Snickers had loved it. Josh was sad that their time together was coming to an end, but he was also happy that Snickers would be going to his own paradise. Josh had been noticing that Snickers had been getting weaker and weaker, and he was relieved that his best friend was going to get the help he needed. He was aware that Snickers probably didn't have much time left, but he was determined to make the most of it. Josh had been doing his best to make sure that Snickers was getting the best care possible. The little boy was grateful that he was able to get the help he needed. And so they spent the entire evening together playing, walking outside, eating their favorite foods, and reliving the memories they had made together. Josh could not help but laugh and reminisce about all the good times they had shared, and the funny moments that had made them all smile. He even took a few pictures to remember the day. Josh knew that this was the last time they would be together for a while, and it was a bittersweet moment. For some reason, they felt that Snickers felt the same way and both had tears in their eyes, but they also had smiles on their faces. They had made so many memories together, and they knew that they would never forget them. When Josh and Snickers woke up the next morning, they were both feeling worse than ever. Josh had not been this sick and weak in a long time, and Snickers had also taken a step back. The day had been incredibly draining, but Peter was sure that it had been worth it. He had seen the joy in Josh's eyes, and he knew that the experience had been invaluable. The pair had been through a lot together, and this was just another obstacle that they had managed to overcome. Josh had been determined to succeed in this challenge, and he had done it. Peter was proud of him, and he was sure that Josh was proud of himself too. The journey had been difficult, but it had been worth it. It was a moment that neither of them would ever forget, and it was a reminder of the strength and courage that they both possessed. Peter was set to bring Snickers to the vet that very morning, and so all that was left to do was for Josh to say goodbye. He had been with Snickers for so many years, and it was hard for him to let go. Josh had grown so attached to his beloved pet, and he was filled with deep sadness as he looked into Snickers' eyes. He clearly did not have much strength left in his body, but he still gave it his all when he hugged his best friend for what seemed to be an eternity. Josh was filled with a mix of emotions, but he knew that he had to be strong for Snickers. He wanted to make sure that Snickers knew that he was loved and that he would be taken care of. Josh wiped away his tears and said a silent prayer for his furry friend before he let go. He knew that Snickers was in good hands, and he hoped that he would be able to come back home soon. Peter and Nadia could not help but let the tears roll down their face. This a parenting moment no book could ever prepare you for. Peter had to take a lot of deep breaths before he could put his hand on his son's shoulder and tell him that it was time to go. He had been dreading this moment for weeks, but he knew it was necessary. He had to be strong for his son, even though his heart was breaking. Nadia was also struggling to keep her composure. She wanted to be strong for her son, but it was so hard to let him go. She had been his rock for so many years, and now she had to let him go and find his own way. She wanted to tell him that everything was going to be all right, but knew that she couldn't promise him that. All she could do was give him a hug and tell him that she loved him. The two of them stood there, holding each other and their son, for what felt like an eternity. But then something happened. Josh's hug had gotten looser and looser the longer he held it, and when he finally let go, his whole body went limp for a second, and he passed out. His skin was pale and clammy, and his breathing was shallow and labored. His eyes were closed and his body was limp, and it was clear that his health was deteriorating at a rapid pace. His family was worried and scared, and they knew that they had to call the hospital sooner than expected. They had to act fast. They had to do something to help him. They had to find a way to get him the medical attention he needed. It was a scary experience for Josh and his family, but they were relieved that Snickers would be able to get the medical attention he needed. Peter was in a hurry to get Snickers to the vet. He wanted to get back to his son as soon as possible, as he knew that time was of the essence. He wanted to spend as much time with him as he could before the inevitable happened. He was determined to do whatever he could to help their beloved pet. And that was that. He was also grateful for the vet's kindness and willingness to help. He was sure that the vet would do everything he could to help Snickers get better. Josh spent the rest of the day in bed, only waking up to eat and drink a little. He seemed to be in a state of deep sleep, and Peter and Nadia were worried about their son's health. They tried to wake him up, but he just wouldn't budge. The next 2 days were very much the same, and Peter and Nadia were starting to get really concerned. They tried to get him to eat and drink more, but he just wouldn't. They were starting to think that maybe something was wrong with him. They kept a close eye on him and noticed that his condition was getting worse. This was a bit strange to them, as they had expected him to get better with time. They tried to get him to talk to them, but he just wouldn't respond. They tried to get him to move around, but he just stayed in bed. The speed at which Josh had gotten sicker the last couple of days was alarming, to say the least. His fever had been rising steadily, and his breathing had become increasingly labored. He had been coughing and sneezing more and more, and his energy levels had been dropping rapidly. His parents had been worried sick and had done everything they could to make him comfortable. They had tried giving him medicine, but it didn't seem to be helping. They had tried to keep him hydrated, but he still felt weak and exhausted. Most of the time, Josh would just hug Snickers, his beloved pup. From that moment on, it seemed like things stopped getting worse for the poor child. He was still weak and tired, but his fever had started to go down and his breathing had become less labored. And that was not all. To the parents' shock and surprise, Josh actually started to slowly improve a bit. They had not even allowed this possibility to cross their mind, as they had been so sure that the only way to help their son was through medication or expensive procedures. But to their amazement, Josh seemingly started to make a recovery without any of these treatments. But how was this possible? Was it a miracle? Was it a fluke? Or was there something else at work? The parents were determined to find out what had caused this sudden change in their son's condition. They began to research and look into alternative treatments, such as diet and lifestyle changes, that could be the cause of Josh's improvement. Nadia was convinced that it had something to do with the hug between Josh and Snickers. She had seen the way the two of them had embraced and the way that Snickers had licked Josh's face. It was almost as if the dog had been trying to heal him, and it had worked. She was certain that the power of love had cured their son and stopped his sickness from getting worse. It was a miracle in her eyes. But Peter had another idea. He thought that maybe the hug had been a sign of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was still something to be thankful for. He thought that maybe the hug had been a reminder that even when things seemed impossible, there was still a chance for a happy ending. He quickly called up their doctor to detail what was happening and provide his possible explanation for this strange occurrence. The doctor was astonished that they had not thought of this before and was eager to consult his fellow physicians. He was met with disbelief from most of them, as they had only read about such occurrences in books and never expected it to happen in real life. The doctor was determined to find out more and decided to contact a few specialists in the field. He was able to get in touch with a few experts who had seen similar cases in the past. They were able to provide more insight into the situation and gave their opinion on the matter. After hearing their advice, the doctor was convinced that the explanation was indeed correct. Josh was soon brought into the hospital again to do a couple of tests. He was feeling a bit anxious, but he was doing fairly well at this point. His main concern was when he was going to see his beloved dog again. But unfortunately, it seemed like that moment of reunion would have to be postponed for a little bit longer. He was comforted by the fact that he was surrounded by the best medical professionals who were doing their best to help him. He was also thankful for the support of his family and friends who were always there for him. He was determined to get through this and be reunited with his furry companion as soon as possible. The doctors managed to determine that Josh actually had an undetected but very severe allergic reaction to the anti-flea spray that Peter usually used on Snickers. He had started to switch to the cheaper brand just before Josh had gotten sick but had never made the connection between the two. After further investigation, the doctors were able to pinpoint the exact cause of Josh's illness. This was a surprise to Peter, as he had never considered the possibility that the spray could be the cause of Josh's illness. He had been using the same brand for years and had never had any issues with it before. The doctors were able to provide Josh with the necessary treatment to help him recover from the allergic reaction, and he was soon feeling much better. Peter was relieved to know that the cause of Josh's illness had been identified, and he vowed to never use the anti-flea spray again. The doctors had thought that the symptoms Josh was showing were way too heavy to be an allergic reaction. When he had first gotten sick, Peter had told them that he had not changed anything in Josh's life that could have caused an allergic reaction. But it seemed that he had been wrong. Could he be exposed to a new allergen, which could have been the trigger for the reaction? The parents had not been aware of the changes in Josh's condition, and this lack of knowledge had a significant impact on the diagnosis and treatment of their son. This delay in treatment had a detrimental effect on Josh's health, as he was not able to receive the care he needed in a timely manner. This lack of timely treatment caused Josh to suffer, and his parents were left feeling helpless and frustrated. The family was overjoyed when they heard the news that Josh's flea allergy was gone. After testing to make sure it was safe for Josh to be around, they immediately took out all the flea spray and replaced it with the more expensive brand they had used before. Josh was given very specific medicine to combat the allergy if it ever came back, and the family was relieved to know that they had taken the necessary steps to ensure his safety. They were also thankful that they had caught the allergy early on, as it could have been much worse if it had gone untreated. Josh was given a strict regimen of medication and was monitored closely to make sure the allergy didn't return. The family was so relieved that Josh was now free of the allergy and could live a normal life. The vet had diagnosed Snickers with a serious illness, and Josh was scared that he would lose his best friend. But the vet was able to treat the dog, and after a few days of rest and medication, Snickers was feeling much better. When the day finally came for Snickers to come home, Josh was overjoyed. He had been counting down the days until he could see his beloved pet again. He was so excited that he could hardly contain himself. When Snickers arrived, Josh was ecstatic. He ran to the car and hugged his furry friend tightly. He was so happy to have Snickers back in his life. The reunion between the two best friends was a beautiful sight. Josh was so relieved that Snickers had made a full recovery and was doing great. Everyone around them was filled with joy and happiness, knowing that the pair would not have to be separated again anytime soon. Josh and Snickers were inseparable from that day forward, and they were both so grateful to have each other back in their lives.